Good evening, everybody. It's Dr. Bob here at the Vitality Project. I welcome you to join me for the next few minutes. We'll be talking live here about a question that one of our followers on Facebook wrote. Michael wrote the following question. I wrote it down here. Give me just a second. I'll find it. Michael wrote, "How do I get rid of shame and regret? It is costing me my life." Thank you, Michael, first of all, for sharing this with us. I appreciate it. As I wrote back to you, Michael, shame is a big fat secret for most of us. You know, in fact, we have shame about shame, and so we don't discuss it. So I do want to talk about it. I think what I'd like to do is introduce it in an indirect way, and we'll get to it in the next 10 or 15 minutes together. Hello, Jason. There's my partner, Jason, has just joined. Welcome to you, Greg. We're discussing shame and what can be done to manage it. And it's in the context of talking about recovery from our bad habits and addictive behaviors. I got up this morning and was going in to lead 4 different groups today. And I realized I wanted to ask a question of the first group, and this is what I did. I had about 20 or 25 members in that first group. I broke the group into 4 different groups of around 5, 6 people. And I said, I want each one of you, hello, Greg, thanks for joining. I said, I want each one of you, each one of the groups to tackle one word that I'm going to give you, and I'm going to ask you to come up with a group definition and share it with the rest of us. And I had thought about this earlier this morning, and I said, I want the first group, in fact, I joined the first group, I want the first group to address the question addiction. What does the word addiction mean? I pointed to the second group and I said, I want you guys to answer the question, what does the word recovery mean to you? And then the third group I said, I want you to take on the word stress. How would you define stress in your group? And then the fourth group, and Michael, this is for you. I know you'll be viewing this later. The fourth group, I said, I'd like to have you guys address the word shame. How do you understand shame? So we went around and each group talked amongst themselves for 5-10 minutes. And then we each selected a representative who brought our group's agreed upon definition to the whole group. And it was very powerful as we unpacked what addiction means in our own words, what recovery means, again in our own words, what stress means, and certainly what shame means. But it was the next question that surprised the heck out of me, and I'm so grateful to see what happened. I was very moved by it. I asked each one of the groups, I said, there's a second question I have for you. Each one of you has a word that I want you to work on defining and bringing that to the larger group. But I said, how about if each group comes up with a word, a term that you wish people that aren't here understood? Basically, loved ones or other people in your life who maybe don't understand addiction from the inside. What's a word that you wish that they understood? And can you give a definition or an understanding of that word? So the group that I was in generated the word pressure. That they wish that people that maybe don't know addiction from the inside, they wish that other people could understand the incredible pressure that somebody who's in active addiction experiences, and not just external pressure like peer pressure or work pressure. One person called it life pressure, but also internal pressure in terms of the pressure one feels inside. And there was one individual in the group who put it so beautifully. He said, the pressure I feel, he says, I feel pressed down, Bob. He says, I don't know if I feel all that much hope that I'm ever going to be able to conquer my addiction. And so what gets pressed down is my sense of reaching my potential. That was beautiful. It gets better. So my group talked about pressure as a term that addresses something that most people who don't understand addiction, well, they just don't get. The next group brought up the term grief. And I wasn't sure what they meant by this. And as they spoke into it, it really went into a surprising place and a very deep place. This group talked about grief. And what they talked about is that most people that don't know addiction from the inside don't understand the grief that comes in terms of having to change one's life 180 degrees and turn and go the opposite direction. When one has learned how to cope, for example, in one's life with alcohol or some other drug, that it's painful to let go of that because it's kind of the tried and true. We had defined addiction earlier as doing something that is counterproductive or even self-destructive, and we can't stop it. And so even though active addiction has so much of a downside in terms of one's health, one's relationships, one's capacity to contribute, maybe it's paradoxical, but it's very hard to stop, especially if you have a long-term pattern of addictive behaviors. So that group discussed grief. Now, Michael, we're getting closer to getting to the topic of shame, and you'll see that in the next couple. The next group said, we wish that people in our lives, particularly those that don't know addiction from the inside, we wish that they understood how disconnected we feel, how profoundly disconnected we feel from ourselves and from others. That led to a lengthy conversation about what it is about active addiction where one becomes more and more isolated. And now we're getting into the zone of self-hatred, of self-judgment, of shame. But it was the fourth group's conversation and what they generated, I think, that was the most powerful to me. What this fourth group discussed was powerlessness. For any of you that have been involved in 12-step groups, you know that the first step actually discusses this issue that we are powerless over our addiction. And I thought that's where this group was going to go. They actually went way deeper than that, I think. And what they said is, they said, people that don't know addiction from the inside, it looks so stupid from the outside. It looks so disrespectful to oneself and to others. It doesn't make any sense. And inside the experience of the active addict, even when you want to stop, you can't. So the profound sense of having lost control of one's life is what they were talking about. And that powerlessness is very, very difficult to explain to somebody if they've never experienced that in the midst of an addiction, particularly an addiction to a powerful substance that is however many more times more powerful than your favorite food, your favorite activity. Hello, Roy. I love your muscle there. That's great, Roy. Thanks for joining, brother. So we talked about the pressure from inside and outside that accompanies addiction. We talked about the grief that accompanies recovery, much less the grief over what one has lost in active addiction, what the program calls wreckage from the past. We talked about the profound sense of disconnection one experiences in addiction, disconnection from oneself, disconnection from others. And we finished by talking about the radical powerlessness, the sense of having no control over one's addiction. This particular individual who was the representative for that group said, it's like getting in a car and hating yourself for driving to the liquor store or driving to the dealer, hating yourself as you pay for the bottle of alcohol or for the drug, hating yourself as you drive back home. He says the only relief comes in the moment or two of getting high or getting drunk. And then what follows that is more hatred. And by any other term, what we're talking about is shame. You know, my background's in psychology, as you all know, and psychology talks about shame this way. Shame is a combination of a threat to my social connection, a threat to my connection to others, and it's a threat to my self-esteem. And I think of them as two sides of a coin because we have such a deep drive biologically to stay connected to our clan, to our family, to our people, to our tribe, that if we can't pull that off, then the self-loathing that follows, that's the trap door to self-esteem falling right through the floor, then our self-esteem takes a major hit. And so they go hand in hand. And then if you think about it, when you feel awful about yourself, like anybody in active addiction, that's what we were talking about today, you tend to isolate because it's shameful. You can't even make eye contact with people when you're in a radical state of shame. We also discussed, and I want to share this with Michael, is that the number one trigger psychologically for addictive behaviors is stress. And we've discussed that a lot here. Excuse me for just a second. I've led a bunch of groups today and my voice is tired and hoarse, so forgive me that. Welcome to Joshua. Thanks for joining us, Joshua. So stress is the number one trigger for addictive behaviors. And a question I would ask you, do you have any idea what the most stressful human emotion is? More stressful than anger, more stressful than fear, more stressful than sadness is shame, where I judge myself as somehow being defective, not worthy of love, not worth much, period. That's the most, there's the highest elevation of stress hormones, adrenaline and cortisol, are with the experience of shame. A threat to social acceptance, a threat to self-esteem, and we go down the rabbit hole of shame. And for anybody that knows addictive behaviors, and we all do, you may not have been addicted to substance. You may not have been addicted to alcohol or cocaine or heroin or methamphetamine, but every one of us knows about addiction as a behavior to cope. And so it might be that when I'm stressed out, especially when I feel ashamed, I'll be more inclined to buy things that I don't need, or they'll be more inclined to eat things that I don't need, and so on the list goes. All of our compulsive behaviors are meant to put out the fire of shame. Put out the fire of stress, and shame is the most stressful of all the human emotions. So Michael, I want to address your question. Michael asked the question, what can I do about shame? Because it's about ready to kill me. Well, Michael, it just about kills all of us. In fact, plenty of people die, I think, trying to put out the fire of shame. Michael, you're with us. Thanks for joining. Really very much appreciate the question that you asked here. Michael, I want to suggest a couple of things. First of all, you can go back and view what we talked about earlier. I kind of set the groundwork, Michael, based on conversations that I had in groups today that prefigures your question. I got home tonight from leading the groups I led and then got your question. I thought, well, that's perfect timing. There's a couple of things that I want to say, Michael. There's three things. First of all, I don't think there's a magic bullet for recovery from addiction, but I think we can get a leg up with a few things. And I feel the exact same way about shame. If there were a magic tonic or a Band-Aid you could put on, you and I'd both be rich. But I think there are resources that once we marshal those resources, once we engage those resources, it makes it harder and harder for shame to thrive. So a couple things I want to focus on as I kind of wind up here tonight. One is that I fully believe, Michael, that ignorance breeds shame. And in the area of addiction of all forms, whether it be to substance or to behavior, there's a lot of ignorance. Historically, people have looked at addictive behaviors as a sign of weakness, a sign of being immoral, or maybe not loving or not caring. That's a limited view. I'm not to say that addiction doesn't affect the moral centers of our brain, but the fact is that when we move into high stress, as with shame, and do something to help to reduce that, it's an open question of how much choice there is in what we resort to, whether that's a pint of ice cream or a line of cocaine. It gets tricky to talk about that in terms of having full choice. And we've been discussing this in previous conversations here at the Facebook Live events about the biology of addiction. I don't have time to get into that, but the biology of addiction can be very illuminating. And so what I want to say is I think ignorance of that biology breeds shame in ourselves and breeds stigma or judgment in others. And so that's a problem right there, is just ignorance, not knowing more. And then shame in the brain is a freeze response. We all know that. You think about it, when you're really ashamed of yourself, you just want to crawl in a hole. You can't possibly own up to your faults if you're ashamed. You can't even make eye contact when you're ashamed. So I think of shame as it's like a possum, the way a possum curls up in a ball and plays dead. That's what shame does to us. And that's really that's the shame response in the brain is really a freeze response, fight, flight, or freeze. So if shame paralyzes me and ignorance breeds shame, what's the antidote to that? I think a good start is good information. I do believe that good information frees. I think it starts with those of us in recovery. I'm highly committed to educating myself and then helping to pass along useful information to others. And as I tell clients that I work with, I just had a group earlier this afternoon, Michael, where I asked them, I say, does knowing a lot about addiction guarantee that I'll stay sober? And the answer is obvious. No, it doesn't. It doesn't guarantee it. It does give us a leg up, however. And one of the things I feel really strongly is it gives us a leg up on shame. If somebody wants to shame the heck out of me for addiction, I better have a ready response inside to myself so that I don't drink the Kool-Aid. I have to find some way to fortify myself. And I think in my view, good scientific information is critical to combating shame. But there's another piece of this, and it's at least as important. Some of you may have seen the, hello, Thomas, good to see you, brother. Some of you may have seen the video. It's virtually viral online. The TED Talk by the Swiss journalist. He's actually a British journalist with a Swiss name, Johann Hari. And his TED Talk is something like, everything that you've heard about addiction is wrong. That'll get your attention. And if you've seen it, you'll remember the last line of the video, because what Johann Hari says is that the opposite of addiction is not sobriety. The opposite of addiction is connection. And Michael and anybody else who's interested in this topic of shame, and I think that all of us should be interested in it if we're aware of it, is that one of the fastest ways to starve shame of the oxygen that it thrives upon is to connect with people that get us, I mean, really get us, to connect with a compassionate community. I think it takes a village to recover. All the research that I've read on sustained successful recovery suggests that those who are involved in some form of a support group of like-minded fellows are the ones that survive. Those are the ones that are able to maintain long-term recovery. I don't think it means that you have to attend any certain group. For some people, it's the 12-step groups, AA and NA. For other people, it's SMART recovery. I've been involved in Refuge Recovery, a mindfulness-based organization. If you're Christian by background, there's Celebrate Recovery. Many churches have Celebrate Recovery. Some group where you can go and feel safe sharing the interior of addiction. And Michael, I think it means being able to talk about shame, to be able to talk about shame with others and not feel ashamed about talking about it. I'll finish with just a couple of comments here. Give me just a second here. I want to give you guys some resources here. I'm putting 3 links online here, and let's see if it comes through. The first link is to a community that I'm working on. I'm working right now with Jason on launching an online community that's absolutely geared towards what we're talking about, providing good scientific information in a safe, compassionate environment. That's the Vitality Project, and I encourage you to check that out. I also really believe in passing along information. I'm a teacher by profession, and I've had to learn what I've had to learn for the sake of my own sobriety. I'm happy to pass that along to you, and I encourage you to go to our YouTube channel to view a whole ton of videos that are on addiction recovery. One of my special interests, because it was so personally close to home to me, Michael, shame just about took me out in early recovery. And before that, in active addiction, shame almost took me out. So I've read my butt off about shame and about what I call unshaming. How do you manage and reduce shame in your life? I've written articles about it. I've done lengthy presentations. I've done multi-day presentations on it, and you can get some of the fruit of that in this YouTube channel. So just check that out. That is completely at your disposal. Hi, Skylar. Good to see you. Very good to see you, Skylar. I remember you well. I've got a final idea for you all, is that, and it's in the spirit of what Michael wrote earlier today, and he said, would you please talk about shame tonight? And I'm glad to have done that. I have another idea for you, and I mentioned it in our last Facebook Live event, and we'll continue to have these and announce these online, either through the Vitality Project Facebook page or my own personal Facebook page. My name is Robert Weathers in Facebook language. Is that I want to invite any of you that would like to interact with me live. So funny, I was at a treatment center today and I was talking to my buddy Kyle, and I said, Kyle, would you like to come on Facebook Live and talk with me? Kyle, you may be here right now. And he said, no flipping way. Without putting anybody on the spot, I want to invite you, if you'd like to join me in one of these events, just in a dialogue, we can actually do that. I didn't know that till this week. But if you're interested and you have a microphone and a camera, I can simply press your icon and we move into conversation. And I'd be happy to talk about this in real time. Anything that we want to talk about that's related to addiction and recovery. Remember, I'm defining addiction broadly to include all of us. 1 out of 4 people over the age of 12 in the United States are addicted to substance. That's 80 million Americans. 10% of that group will ever get help. That's 8 million. That means there's 72 million that won't get help. That's who I care about. It's those that fall through the cracks. And so I want to create a community here that's vital and alive and that addresses the 72 million that aren't getting help, because help is either not accessible and or it's not affordable. And so I'm working on this full time. I'm meeting this next week to find out about possible grants that would help support our launching the Vitality Project, because there's not a whole lot of people that are attempting to do what we're doing. It's bound to happen. I read an article today that just came out about work that's been done, research that's been done. I think it was published in the Journal of the American Medical Association, that looks at the effectiveness of treatment that's delivered online for depression. Well, if it works for depression, why wouldn't it work in terms of support for those of us that are the most marginalized of any category of disease or disorder? And that would be any of us that know addiction from the inside. So that would be the 25% that are addicted to substance. 90% of Americans in adulthood will say they have at least one behavioral addiction right now. Compulsive eating, compulsive sex, compulsive gambling, compulsive social media, online gaming, the list goes on. Virtually anything that you can imagine, anything that we can do to address stress that raises our rewards and our chemicals, specifically dopamine, can soon enough become addictive if we're not careful. And what makes something addictive is not that we do it a lot. What makes it addictive is that we do something a lot that is destroying our lives. Oh, thank you. Tom, did you send a link to the video I was talking about? I can't open it right now, but thank you, Tom. I appreciate that. You guys can check out that video. If it's the video we were just talking about, it's by Johan Hari. If that's not the one, Johan Hari is an author. He wrote a book called Chasing the Scream, which I highly recommend. His video, which is about 12 minutes of your life, is well worth seeing, and it's impossible to watch that and not cry with recognition. So check that out. It's Johann Hari, Hari, Johan Hari. So I want to invite any of you that want to join me here to talk in real time about anything that relates to your life around any bad habit that you have that's ending up having a negative impact. And that's really that's our definition of addiction. Remember, addiction comes from the root word addictus, which in Latin simply means to be enslaved. And Michael, I think that not only does addiction enslave us, but I think shame enslaves us. And then when those two get wound together, it's a tight knot. And what we're looking for is freedom to be who we are, liberation from addiction, liberation from enslavement, and I believe liberation from shame. And so just to summarize, 2 things that I'd emphasize that you could do a lot worse than work on these 2 things is get as much information as you can around shame, particularly if it's related to addiction. Addiction is certainly the most stigmatized illness that you can have, and I could talk more about the research that's indicated that. So more information, good solid information. I hope to provide that here in our Facebook Live events, the YouTube videos, etc. And the second thing is to make sure that you engage in community of like-minded folks. We talked about this tonight in one of the groups before I got home, is that, if you can find a community, if you go to a church where you can be open about the dark side of your life around addictive behaviors, then good for you. That would be the aim of a spiritual community. If you have a civic organization, if you know a Lions Club locally where you can be transparent about your addiction, then bless you. That's wonderful. If you have a family, we're coming up on holidays like Passover and Easter. If you have a family that you can get around the table for a holiday like that, or July 4th or Thanksgiving or Christmas, and you can talk openly and vulnerably about your addiction and your struggles, around shame, then wonderful. But the fact is, and you know that I'm saying all of this tongue in cheek, very few of us have had that experience in collective groups. I oftentimes will tell people in the groups that I lead live, I lead 15 groups a week at 6 different treatment centers, and I tell them the best resource you have in your life right now is in this room. It's all of us who know addiction from the inside, and it's supporting one another. And Michael, honest to goodness, it seems like to me that the release of the tentacles of shame requires community, and it requires a healing community that's committed to non-judgment, is committed to acceptance, is committed to clear self-disclosure and vulnerability, is committed to the courage it takes to heal one's life. And so I would wish you well in that. Continue to stay in conversation with me. I have to wind down, you guys. I'm getting ready to move into, I have a little bit of work I have to do tonight before I call it a day. I want to thank all of you for joining me very much. Come check out the Vitality Project. I'd love to invite you into this community, and I think you can't go wrong with that. So yeah, thank you so much. Michael, I appreciate, as I wrote you earlier, appreciate your guts, appreciate your courage, your grit for bringing this and keeping it real. Tom writes here, the TED Talk about Rat Park. You know what? I think that's the one, Tom. Check out Tom's link here. Bless all of you. Have a wonderful evening, and I'll keep you abreast of more Facebook Live events. Take good care. Bye-bye for now.